Welcome, Jonny, to Metallarium Pages. It's a great pleasure to talk with you about Wombbath, this new album Beyond the Abyss, and more things related to the metal world in general. So we are starting by asking, so how are you doing today? How is the band during the last 4 years? Because your previous album, Acma, was released in 2021.
That's correct. Yeah. It's been well, we released it just before the pandemic and all that hit. So it kind of went from us playing loads live and stuff like that, being very active to uh, there was no gigs, no nothing. And after that we never picked up the momentum again. But we're planning to with this album, so we're going to try and start playing loads more live again and stuff like that.
Mhm. Okay, okay. So now you mentioned one thing about the pandemic because there's a curious thing happened for Wombat during the pandemic, especially in those years, because you released three albums in 2020 and 2021, so three albums. So how do you compare the promotion of that three albums that came out during the pandemic, and now we have a new album outside of the pandemic?
Well, I think the biggest difference is we were on a different label when we released those ones. So we were on Transcending Obscurity, whereas we're now on Pulverized,
Mhm.
and they have very different promotion ways to promote, and the strategy for them is completely different. So I think the way that our current label, Pulverized, promotes us and does things suits us way better. Because with Agma, for example, that album came out on, I think it was released on New Year's Eve even. And there was a lot of people that missed the album altogether. And like a couple months after, there was people getting in contact with us and going, "Oh, we didn't realize you released an album, and we missed it for our reviews and and stuff like that." So that was a bit of a shame. But with this one, we've had so much good feedback, and like the way that the label has promoted everything has been top notch. It's been superb.
Mhm. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Oh, you are talking about the difference of the promotion. So, well, since you return, since you returned in 2015 with your Downfall Rising, so that album came out from Dark Descent Records. Then The Great Desolation was released in Soul Seller Records. The next one also, the Quartz of the Fallen, was released for Soul Records. Then the next two was released for Transcending, and now one of the oldest ones, because Polarized is the oldest one compared to the other ones that you were in. So for you, how many things changed since you returned during the promotion, since your Downfall Rising, the great album by the way, to this now you are working with Polarized?
I think in terms of the styles of labels and stuff like that, Pulverized is like they're above. There's so much more. They've got a foot in like the old school death metal scene, firmly seated in the old school death metal scene, and extreme music in general. So and they've been, as you said, they're the oldest of the labels, so they've got their channels and they've got their contacts and they've got everything is already, it's like smooth sailing with everything.
Hmm.
And it just goes to show with the whole process of releasing the album overall, it's just been a pleasure to work with them because every piece of the puzzle has come together really, really well.
Hmm. Okay, okay. As I mentioned it, so Wombat returned in 2014. So just Haku, it is the last member for the original lineup from the 90s, and you enter with the band in 2014. So how this reunite, or who came with the first stone? So who came? Oh, and we need to rebuild Wombat. It was Haku, and it was you with the proposal with Von Soms. How this reunite, or how this reform Wombat happened at 2014?
Well, the plan was actually to only make one final album. So Håkan had the idea of bringing in some friends to create one last like the Nail in the Coffin album for Wombbath to
Mhm.
just end that chapter of his life. But as it happened, when we were recording the album, we had so much fun that me and Håkan started talking and saying that maybe we should revive Wombbath and give it a proper go and start playing live and stuff like that. So even before we finished the album, we've decided that we were going to make it a go and we were going to start playing live and keep on going with the band. And I'm truly grateful that he agreed to that decision because Wombbath became my main band
Mm.
that at the same second as we decided that we were going to go for it. That was like my my main band.
Mhm. Amazing, 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 amazing. Now, when I hear, I remember when I hear for Doubtful Raisin, well, you try to bring back the old sound from Wombat, but obviously you try to a little spicy for this new era. That's completely normal. Then the Great Desolation have the same one. Since your Tales of Madness and Atma, you try to re-engineer a lot of things with Woodman, and with this new vision of Abyss, you bring like you are personalize the sounds from Wombat. So for you, so which is this evolution in the sound for Wombat? It was a conscious decisions, or perhaps some is something that happened when you were composing, or you trying to expand the sound for the band.
Well, it was both actually. It kind of happened naturally, and we were working on the songs and writing the music for well, mainly for well, it started with Agma, I think. Well, we had a little bit of it before then as well, but the biggest change you can tell was on Agma, and when we were working on that one, we started thinking of ideas to incorporate other stuff like violin and st things like that.
Mhm.
And it just felt natural to do so on that album. So when we went into making Beyond the Abyss, we started looking at the songs and the structures, and we felt that we had a really, really super solid foundation to build on. And we wanted to take that foundation and take what we already had and elevate it and make it even better and make it even more our own type of sound because we're playing old school death metal and we're not reinventing the wheel or anything like that, but at the same time we want to be our own entity within the death metal world, and the death metal world at the moment is quite saturated. There's a lot of bands, a lot of really good bands, but there is a lot of bands. So we love to experiment with music. So if that then elevates the songs and make us stick out a little bit within that sea of bands, then that's just a positive thing for us.
Okay, okay. So now I'm usually when you have more than 6 albums, you have to in some parts you have the option to repeat to reuse an old riffs because that is normal. It's part of your sound. That's completely normal. But in this process to compose a new music, so how do you maintain the sound of Wombat from from the 90s and at the same time keeping fresh the new sound with Woodman?
I think that as well comes quite naturally because when I'm writing stuff for Wombbath, or when Håkan is writing stuff for Wombbath, or when Thomas is writing stuff, we all have that first the EP, the demos and stuff like that from back in the 90s in the back of our head, and we know what we think as a collective, as a band, the Woombath sound is. So subconsciously, when we're writing riffs for Woombath, they turn out in the way that we want Woombath to sound.
Okay. Okay. Now talking about a little more about the cover art because this cover art really like it because something related with the Tartarus from the Inferno from the Greek mythology. That's for me. I try to relate all the time these kind of things. So, but as you are the composer and the creator, the music, the lyrics, and obviously your influence to create the cover art. So, how do you relate all these concepts? What kind of message try to provide to the listeners about this the relationship with the music, with the cover art, and obviously the name of the album?
The cover art was we were looking everywhere to find someone to do the artwork for this one because we felt that it had to be very, very specific to what the album was. And the songs on the album, the lyrical theme and such is, as the title says, beyond the abyss. What where would we end up if we ventured beyond the end of the world when everything is gone and there's nothing left? So we wanted artwork to portray that feeling of complete hopelessness, and complete loss for life. We looked around at different artists, and Håkan was in contact with Julian, who made our cover or the artwork for our album, and he actually made us two album covers. And he does them the classical ways. He paints on a canvas, so proper,
Mm.
like with a brush and everything. And he sent us the two artworks, and both of them were so good that we ended up using both of them. So on the vinyl version, you get the second album artwork in the inner sleeve, and then the same as on the CD you get on the front of the vinyl.
Mm, amazing, amazing, amazing. Now, talking about a little more about the promotion for this Beyond the Abyss. So, what kind of plans do you have, or what kind of plans do you have for Wombat in general, for Beyond the Abyss? And obviously, so perhaps you're already working a new album, you're scheduled to gigs or festivals or summer festivals in Europe because we're close for this.
Well, it's a hard thing when you're releasing a new album. You have to time it quite well to be able to get on the slots for the summer festivals and stuff like that. And with this album being released fairly recently, it's a bit too late to get booked on any of the summer festivals this year because they're usually booked already a year in advance.
Mhm.
So this year, the summer at least, we're not going to play a lot of live shows, but in the fall and the autumn, we're going to play a little bit more, and then next summer we're going to aim to play as much as possible and as many festivals as possible.
Mm. Okay. Okay, okay. So now, how many things changed during the composition of the three albums? Because that is a new. Sometimes it's unusual when you release three albums in a row. Three Shores of the Fallen, Tales of Madness, and Acma. It was composed like a 1 year of difference. The three albums, and just this album is like the 4 years of difference with the previous one. So how many things? Why did you decide to release that three albums in a row, and now decide to release this new album 5 days away from these three albums?
Well, those three albums were actually, even though they were released quite close to each other, they were written very far apart. So, Choirs of the Fallen was written almost 2 years before it was released. Those songs were actually written around the same time as we were working on the album before that. And with the Tales of Madness album, that's actually uh, most of the songs on that one, or if not all, is re-recordings of old demo songs and some songs that was on the Lavatory EP, which was truly horrible EP. It really sucked, but we wanted to see if we could make something out of those songs. So Tales of Madness is more of a compilation of old stuff and reimagining of those songs.
Mhm.
And then because uh, we we had already written all the stuff previously, we had actually quite a few years to write the songs for Agma. So even though they were released really close to each other, the songwriting itself was spread out through many, many years.
Mm. Okay, okay. Now talking about a little more about beyond and other kind of things. Well, for me, this new album sounds great. Sounds solid. So with these organic sounds from the well, usually for the metal, for the golden era for the death metal. That's a great thing because as you compare now, there is a lot of musicians or bands trying to sound like perfect without kind of error in the studio or like when they play their instruments, they play like a best word. So you can when now you can hear the albums, and these 30 albums sounds amazing, sounds great, no errors, no mistakes, everything perfect in the studio. But in the live it's a different situation. So in this situation you remember very well for this because in the 80s or 90s when you have 4 albums or 5 albums from thrash metal in the 80s, three sounds amazing. The other two are, there is not a good album that. In the 90s, it was the same. At the beginning of 2000, it was the same. But now with this standardization of the sound, all records sounds amazing. There's no bad musicians, no bad records. So what's your point of view about now, especially into the extreme music? We have a lot of bands that sounds amazing, perfectly, and not bad records during the end of the weeks because now all end weeks we have 1,000 releases.
Yeah. Well, I think it, there's a time and place for everything. I think some bands
Mhm.
actually sound better when they have that polished sound and you have that perfect production and everything sounds in place just because it fits the music better and you can really tell all the details if you have really really intricate playing and technical stuff. Then I think sometimes if you have a production that is too gritty or too organic, the songs won't come out that well. So in that aspect, it's really good that there is the technology now that almost anyone can get a really, really good production without having to spend a month in a super, super expensive studio. But at the same time, I think it's important to know when you use it and when not to use it. So with the type of death metal that we play, I don't think it fits. So if you have that clean, super clean, crisp sound, it just doesn't sound good. It sounds a bit fake. Maybe not fake, but it sounds like there's no heart and soul into it. I think that if you're playing old school death metal and the riffs are fairly straightforward and simple, and you got kind of that punk feel to it, it has to be a little bit dirty. It has to bring some grit in the sound, or else you're gonna lose the songs.
Hmm. Okay, okay. Now with this topic also, as you can see, there is an overwhelming releases per weekend. So we have like I don't know 60 or 50 releases per weekend. That is impossible now to catch up. Even we are working as a media, but for us it's impossible to catch up these 60 releases per weekend. So now for some old people or new people thinks that these 60 releases per weekend is good for the scene, but for other people it's bad because there is oversaturated the extreme metal or the metal in general. So what's your point of view about these overwhelming releases in the world, in the metal world?
I think it's good. I think it's good that people well, there's a good side and a bad side that comes with everything, but it just goes to show that death metal and extreme metal in general is something that people are passionate about. And I don't think we would have this many releases if people didn't have the passion and if they weren't having a burning passion for it, which is very, very positive, which means that there is a lot of people that still wants to listen to it, that still wants to play it, and it is something that is never going to die away. But at the same time, there's a lot of really, really, really good bands that kind of falls under the radar and people don't hear about them. They'll have like 100 listeners per month on streaming platforms when they're good enough to they should have thousands instead. And that's the downside of it. They just disappear in the sheer amount of releases.
Mm. Okay. Okay, okay. Now, talking about your old projects, because I saw that you have a lot of projects here in your career. So, how do you divide the time first, and also how do you divide the ideas for all your projects? You said one thing about the Wombbath is your main band, but how also that you have a lot of other bands like plays death metal, a different kind of death metal, not usually from the Wombbath style. But for you, how do you divide all the ideas? And for you, in which instance when you create a riff or you create an idea for a band, decide this riff is for example, for God Brigade, or this riff's going to Head for Death. How do you divide all these kind of new riffs appears in your mind for a different bands?
Um, I th for me, it's kind of instant. If I start writing a riff, when I write a riff, normally I have another riff on top of that in my mind already. And with that, I know instantly that this is going to be a Wombbath song or this is going to be a Heads for the Dead song. And I think because of that, it it kind of becomes a different sound for each of the bands. Because if you're starting to write a bunch of riffs and you're not sure what band they're going to end up for, you don't have that aim that you need to make it specifically for that band. In the case of having a lot of bands at the same time, that is. So if you know straight off, like the first note you play, like, yeah, this is going to be a Wombat song, then everything else around that riff uh, is written in a way to fit the sound of Wombat.
Mhm. Hmm. Okay, okay. So now talking about a little more about your one records that captured my attention in the 2000 and 2021 is because you were in the comeback for Massacre at that moment with that album with Resurgence, and a lot of people is expecting a new album. So how was the work with one of Massacre is a great well-known band for the first album. Even for Cam Lee, it's considered like the first vocals in the guttural aspect around the world, especially in the death metal. So how was the work with him with that album and with now with a mythic band like it's Massacre now?
It was really, really good. I had a lot of fun when we were working on that album.
Mhm.
Um, it was quite surreal because Massacre is one of those bands that I grew up listening to and have always been a big fan ever since I was a teenager. So for Cam to ask me if I wanted to join the band and work on the album, it was like a dream come true.
Okay. Oh, amazing, amazing. So, well, we are very close to end this interview. One of the last questions about this one. So one thing that I said about these old people sounds like perfect, sounds amazing. As you can see, there is 50 or 60 releases. But one thing that is for especially for me when I hear bands from the 90s, especially in the death metal, you can see 10 bands. Monstrosity, Deicide, Cannibal Corpse, Wombat, Entomb, and all these 10 bands sounds different between each one. That's a great difference that happened at that moment. And now you have 60 bands, but the 60 bands sounds like the same. So there is no more any kind of difference with, especially in the death. When you play Swedish death metal, you know that they play Swedish death metal because they have an influence for the old bands. But so for you, is it good or is bad? This like and mostly all bands sounds the same without kind of reminiscing something special.
Well, I think as long as the bands doesn't sound like an exact copy of the old bands.
Mhm.
Like they're using the same riffs and the same everything. I really don't mind it because I mean you could take Entombed for example. In my opinion, they released three good albums and that was it. And if I wanted to listen to bands with or like the sound of Entombed, I would have to rehash those albums over and over and over again and over again, which I do, but at the same time, you would like to hear them releasing a new album that sounds as good as those old albums. But then you have young kids that now in this day and age discover that old HM2 Sunlight production and the Swedish death metal sound, or they discover old American death metal bands and they want to try and mimic that. And when they do it really well, I think that is just as good as those old bands releasing new albums that are really good. So I, I don't mind it at all. I think as long as they're not doing a carbon copy of it and like stealing the riffs and stealing the ideas and stuff like that and trying to make it their own thing. And you if you can tell that they're passionate about it, then even better. I love it.
Okay, okay. Well, Johnny, we come to the sad moment of this interview. I hope you enjoyed this one like me. This new album is a great one. We put in a score on a 9 from 10. It's a great
Thank
album.
you.
I request my copy, or I pre-order my copy. I hope so. Arrive soon. Sometimes arrive here in a month, but who knows? And sometimes arrive a little faster. So. Perhaps do you want to add something to your Latin American fans and obviously Methalarium followers?
Well, I just want to say thank you for supporting the underground extreme metal scene. Without the fans and everyone that's listening to us, we'd still be in the rehearsal room playing to ourselves.